Ah, my dear friend, imagine sitting by a fire infused with the wisdom of the ages, because today I'm taking you back to the earliest days of Britain, back to when the glaciers retreated and the land opened its arms to new life. In those days, Britain's cool winds carried the footsteps of hunters and gatherers. There were no villages yet, no cities, just the endless embrace of nature and the constant struggle for survival. It was here that our ancestors built the first bridges, raised great stones, and lit fires that would guide the way forward. These early acts, born of necessity and ingenuity, laid the foundation for something far greater. This is the story of a civilization's seeds, of people coming together and drifting apart, of monumental stones erected and ancient tales woven into the land. But how did this mysterious island embark on the path that would lead to its remarkable history? Come, sit with me and listen. Our journey begins. My dear friend, close your eyes and imagine. We're traveling back to the dawn of time, to an age when this land was just beginning to awaken. The world was not as we know it today. It was a place ruled by ice, where unforgiving winds howled across desolate plains. Britain wasn't an island yet, but was instead connected to mainland Europe by a land bridge. Across that bridge came the first people, stepping into the uncharted wilderness of Britain. Picture the glaciers retreating, revealing soil that breathed for the first time. These early settlers were courageous souls venturing into the unknown. With simple stone tools in their hands and survival etched into their hearts, they hunted, gathered, and fought to exist within nature's harsh cycles. Despite the brutal conditions of the Paleolithic age, they laid down roots in Britain, carving out a fragile existence. Life back then was both simple and grueling. Herds of woolly mammoths, giant deer, and woolly rhinos roamed the open plains, serving as both prey and peril for the first Britons. Imagine the bravery it took to hunt a mammoth, armed only with stone axes and spears. These people weren't just hunters, they were survivors in a world where they were as much prey as predator. Envision the biting cold of winter seeping into their bones as they huddled in caves. The smoke curling from their fires wasn't just warmth. It carried their stories, their myths, and their hopes. Fire was more than light. It was a shield, a comfort, and a beacon of life. Imagine a small group gathered around the flickering flames in a dark cavern, finding not just physical warmth but a sense of connection and resilience. But my friend, their journey to Britain wasn't merely an act of courage. It was also an opportunity offered by nature itself. The world was undergoing profound climate changes. Between ice ages, warmer periods melted the glaciers, opening pathways and creating land bridges. These connections allowed the first people to set foot on Britain. What they found, however, was a land of harsh climates and unforgiving terrain. The Paleolithic people faced life's most fundamental challenges, finding shelter, securing food, and protecting themselves from danger. They took refuge in caves or natural rock formations and relied on simple tools to hunt and gather. Every successful hunt, every gathered root or berry was a triumph, a delicate dance along the line between life and death. Today we can still find traces of their footsteps in Britain. They lived in harmony with nature, learning to adapt and thrive, but they also faced nature's brutal reality with unyielding determination. Their story isn't just about survival, it's a testament to human spirit and resilience. Do you see it now, my friend? The first inhabitants of Britain weren't just pioneers of this land, they were part of the greater story of humanity itself. Their brave first steps into these untamed lands laid the foundation for all the stories that followed. So sit with me a while longer by the fire and listen to the echoes of their ancient courage. But my friend, let's go back once more to those magical times when Britain began to breathe again after the glaciers retreated. The world had become warmer, more livable, but that didn't mean the hardships were over. People were still battling nature to survive. Now let me take you to the Mesolithic period, also known as the Middle Stone Age. This is when humans really began to shine with their intelligence and adaptability in the face of nature. The glaciers had pulled back and Britain had become an island once again. The land bridge connecting it to mainland Europe was submerged, leaving people to face a more isolated way of life. But don't forget, my friend, humanity's greatest strength lies in its ability to adapt. The people of the Mesolithic era embraced a hunter-gatherer lifestyle, learning to make the most of nature's resources. Picture this, a dense forest with a group of people moving through it, carrying carefully crafted stone tools. These were the first hunter-gatherers, skilled in the art of survival and deeply in tune with nature's rhythms. The large animals of the Ice Age had disappeared, replaced by smaller, faster creatures. Hunting these animals required not just brute strength, but clever strategy. Stone tools became more refined during this time. These people shaped flint into sharp points and arrowheads with incredible precision. The bow and arrow, one of the most important inventions of the Mesolithic era, made hunting not only easier but also more efficient, allowing them to catch more animals with less effort. Now imagine this, my friend. A group gathered at a campsite by a stream. Women and children sorting berries, roots, and plants collected from the forest. Men sharpening their spears and arrows, while another group fishes nearby. The people of the Mesolithic era were masters of utilizing every aspect of their environment. During this period, they began to ease the hardships of their nomadic life by building temporary shelters. These shelters, often located near rivers and in forested areas, protected them from the harsh elements. Fire also became a more integral part of their lives. It wasn't just a source of warmth, but also a tool for cooking meat, making plants more edible and warding off predators. One of the most remarkable things about the Mesolithic era was how people started to interact with and shape their environment, not just survive in it. For instance, some groups began observing the growth cycles of plants, laying the groundwork for the eventual shift to agriculture. When you think about the people of this era, it's hard not to admire their resilience and ability to adapt. Every hunt, every gathering of food, every campsite, they were all small yet vital victories in the ongoing struggle to survive. My friend, the story of the Mesolithic people isn't just a lesson in history. It's a testament to the art of adapting to and living in harmony with nature. Despite the challenges, they found a way to thrive and left a lasting legacy on these lands. Now, reflect on how these people built a world with nothing more than stone tools and determination, and prepare for our next story. These lands have many more tales to tell. Oh, my dear friend, let me take you to a completely different age, one that changed the course of humanity forever, the Neolithic Age, or as it's often called, the New Stone Age. Just imagine, people looking to the stars to find their way, working the land, and deciding for the first time to claim a permanent place in this world. This was the era when farming began to bloom, when the first steps toward settling down were taken, and when grand dreams were etched into stone. In the earlier Mesolithic period, people lived as hunters and gatherers. But in the Neolithic period, that cycle was broken. Humans discovered how to cultivate the land, tame nature's offerings, and produce their own food. Here in the quiet lands of Britain, the emergence of the first farmers marked the beginning of a profound transformation. Agriculture pulled people away from their nomadic ways, laying the foundations for villages and communities. Picture this, my friend, a vast green plain stretching as far as the eye can see. A group of people using simple but effective stone tools, digging into the earth and planting seeds, men, women, and children all working together. Not just as a chore, but as a way of life. Barley, wheat, and legumes began to sprout in these fields under their care. Settling down didn't just revolutionize food production, It changed the social order too. Villages started to emerge, and people began building permanent homes. These houses made of wood and stone weren't just shelters but sanctuaries for families. But it wasn't just villages that took shape. Great dreams began to materialize. One of the most iconic examples is Britain's Stonehenge. Stonehenge isn't just a testament to the engineering brilliance of the Neolithic age, it reflects their spiritual world as well. Imagine this: a misty morning with the first rays of sunlight piercing through the massive stone pillars. Those stones symbolize humanity's deep connection with nature and their quest to find meaning in the stars above. Structures like this show that Neolithic people weren't just surviving, they were trying to understand the world and their place in it. Agriculture didn't just provide sustenance, it created abundance. That abundance gave people time to explore art, rituals, and social bonds. Monuments like Stonehenge are evidence of collective strength and collaboration. They may have served as giant calendars to track the seasons and celestial movements. Or perhaps they were places of worship and reverence. And what about the people who moved those colossal stones? Each one likely left a piece of their story behind. Some were leaders, some were laborers, and some might have simply watched in awe. But together, they were all part of a shared effort to leave their mark on this world. The shift to a settled life wasn't just about farming. Animal husbandry also advanced during this time. Sheep, goats, and cattle were domesticated, providing food and clothing. Settled life also paved the way for trade among communities. Stone, wood, and bone tools, along with pottery and decorative items, are remnants of this growing exchange. The Neolithic period is a tale of transformation, my friend. Humanity moved from being a part of nature to shaping it. The people of Britain were no exception. With their simple tools and grand dreams, they left behind traces of their lives that have endured through the centuries. Now take a moment to reflect on the legacy of these people. In our next story, we'll explore the next step in the evolution of civilizations on these lands. But for now, let's keep listening to the stories whispered to us by the stones and the soil. Hello, young friend. Let me take you to another pivotal moment in human history, the Bronze Age. This was a time when humanity didn't just conquer nature, but also began to harness the power hidden deep within the earth. The warm glow of bronze wasn't just seen in tools and weapons. It also illuminated the imaginations of the people who shaped this era. Picture this, the dawn of the Bronze Age. People discovered how to combine copper and tin to create bronze, a new alloy far more durable and versatile than the stone and bone tools they had relied on before. This breakthrough revolutionized toolmaking and weaponry. Here in Britain, the people of this age quickly embraced the new technology. Imagine, friend, those who once labored with stone tools now transforming the land and shaping the forests with the strength of bronze. Bronze wasn't just a material, it was the driving force behind a social and economic transformation. During this period, trade flourished across Britain. Merchants from faraway lands began docking their ships along its shores to obtain copper and tin. Rich deposits of tin in regions like Cornwall turned Britain into a hub of commerce. Picture bustling coastal marketplaces where people bartered with precious bronze artifacts, exchanging goods brought from distant lands. This era wasn't just marked by trade, it also saw the evolution of society itself. The production of bronze tools elevated the status of craftsmen who could work with a new metal. Envision a blacksmith's workshop in a village, the fire roaring in the hearth, the air thick with the metallic tang of molten bronze, and tools taking shape under the hands of a skilled artisan. These craftsmen weren't just tool makers, they became highly respected members of their communities. Society grew more complex during the Bronze Age. Where earlier times were characterized by egalitarian structures, this period brought hierarchies. Wealthy traders, powerful leaders, and skilled artisans began to hold more influence. Villages expanded into larger settlements as people learned to live, trade, and work together on a larger scale. And what of the bronze tools and weapons that defined this age? They didn't just make farming more efficient, they transformed the art of warfare. Swords, spearheads, and armor made of bronze became the tools of conquest, changing the nature of conflicts. These innovations paved the way for larger-scale battles and the rise of leaders and kings who commanded armies. One more striking development of this time was the shift in belief systems. The people of the Bronze Age maintained their deep connection to nature, continuing to revere the earth and sky. But as societies grew more complex, so too did their rituals and spiritual practices. Some stone monuments and burial mounds from this period are thought to have served as centers of ritual and worship. Picture this, my friend. The night sky glittering with stars. A group of people gathered, holding bronze objects as they perform a ritual. Perhaps it's a prayer of gratitude to a deity, or a ceremony to bless a leader's power. Whatever the purpose, these moments bridged the past and the future for these people, grounding them in a world of change. The Bronze Age wasn't just a technological leap, it was an era of profound social and cultural transformation in Britain. It marked humanity's transition from surviving in the world to shaping it. The union of human ingenuity and the strength of bronze left a legacy that still echoes through time. Now rest, my friend. In our next story, we'll delve deeper into the impact of these changes. But for now, ponder the glow of bronze that lit up this era and the enduring legacy of the people who shaped it. Ah, my dear friend. Now we will leave the warm glow of the Bronze Age and step into another turning point in human history, the Iron Age. This was a time of not just powerful minds, but powerful societies. The Iron Age was a time that changed the destiny of Britain, for it was during this period that a new people came to the islands. Celts. Iron. This strong metal was much harder and more durable than bronze. People began to work iron to produce agricultural tools, weapons of war, and tools for everyday life. This land of Britain was reshaped by the power of iron. No longer just cultivating the land, people began to fight with iron swords and explore mines with iron picks. This increased production and made societies more complex. Perhaps the biggest event of the Iron Age was the settlement of the Celts in Britain. The Celts arrived in Britain in waves of migration from Central Europe. Imagine, my friend, this people from distant lands brought with them a new culture, a new language, and new traditions. From the plains to the forests, their presence is felt everywhere. The Celtic communities brought not only ironworking to these lands, but also a rich cultural heritage. As the Celts made Britain a center of trade, they brought their beliefs, art, and way of life to the local people. Celtic art was characterized by intricate patterns, spiral motifs, and animal figures. This art can be seen in stone carvings, metalwork, and ceramics. Everything in Celtic society was based on a clan-based structure. Clans consisted of interconnected families, and the leaders of these families were respected within the community. Leaders were usually chosen from among the charismatic and wise, skilled in warfare. Imagine, my friend, that a leader is like a shepherd who protects his people and keeps them together. But this shepherd was a warrior who, when necessary, drew his sword and stood up to his enemies. Warrior culture was very important among the Celts. A Celtic warrior was not just someone who swung a sword, but a person of honor and courage. In Celtic society, a person's reputation was measured by his bravery on the battlefield. The heroic songs sung by warriors as they defeated their enemies formed the basis of legends that have survived to this day. Celtic society was also deeply spiritual. The priests, the druids, were the religious and intellectual leaders of society. Oh man, if you only knew the wisdom of those druids. They read the sky to predict the weather, searched for healing herbs deep in the forests, and were believed to communicate with the gods. Druids were not only clergymen, but also historians, jurists, and philosophers. The Celts left a great mark on these lands. Their clan systems shaped the social structure, and their ironworking changed not only the art of warfare, but also agriculture and daily life. The cultural heritage of the Celts has become an important part of Britain's identity. Now, my young friend, close your eyes for a moment and imagine that time in Britain. Celtic villages on rolling green hills, iron smelting fires burning in forges, people living in the shadow of warriors and priests. This land still bears their mark to this day. Ah, my young friend. Britain's history was shaped not only on its own soil. Like the seas that surround it, the island weaved a web around it, a web of trade routes, diplomatic relations, and cultural interactions. Britain's geographical position made it both an isolated fortress and a bustling center of trade. Britain lies at the northwestern tip of Europe, on the shores of the Atlantic Ocean. Surrounded by the breadth of the continent to the east and the vastness of the ocean to the west, it is as if this island was placed to serve both defense and connection. Imagine, my friend, sailboats appearing on the horizon. The island's position allowed easy contact with other peoples of the continent, especially the Gauls and Iberians. It also offered an isolated security zone, protecting Britain from risks on the high seas. Britain's natural resources also reinforced this strategic importance. The island's fertile soil allowed grain and other agricultural products to grow in abundance. However, the real riches lay deep within its soil. Minerals such as tin, lead, and iron turned Britain into an island of treasure. Tin, in particular, was vital in the production of bronze, and Britain became one of the most important sources of this precious metal. Gaulish merchants established a vast trade network, taking tin from Britain and transporting it to the Mediterranean. But Britain's strategic value was not limited to its resources. The sea routes around the island were the lifeblood of trade. The Irish Sea to the north, the North Sea to the east, and the English Channel to the south made Britain a transit point. These sea routes were used for both trade and cultural exchange. Merchant ships called at Britain's ports, carrying both goods and ideas. Ah, my friend, imagine different languages, different traditions echoing in these ports. Merchants, soldiers, travelers, everyone had a story. The Gauls occupied a special place in the connections between Britain and continental Europe. The Gauls were one of the most powerful communities in the Celtic world and had close ties with Britain. Gaulish merchants bought tin and other minerals from Britain and brought wine, salt, and bronze in return. These trade relations meant not only economic, but also cultural exchange. The influence of the Gauls on Britain was not limited to trade. Migrations and raids further strengthened this bond. The widespread of the Celts across continental Europe extended to Britain. During these migrations, not only people, but also beliefs, language, and traditions were carried. Imagine, my friend, a group of Gaulish ships docking on the coast of Britain one afternoon. They bring to the islanders not just new trade goods, but new stories, new heroic epics, and new gods. This relationship between Britain and the Gauls also reinforced the unity and solidarity of the Celtic world. In times of war, for example, warriors from Britain fought alongside the Gauls. Likewise, the links between Druids were strong. Gaulish and British Druids often met and exchanged knowledge and rituals. Another important link between Gauls and Britons was the similarity of social structures. Both peoples were clan-based. Leaders not only protected their communities but also guided them. The stories of these leaders are legendary even today. Britain's links with continental Europe transformed it from an island nation into an integral part of the Celtic world. This network of both commercial and cultural ties has put Britain in a powerful position on the stage of history. Now, my friend, close your eyes and imagine. Ships docking, merchants bargaining, the wisdom of Druids and the heroic songs of warriors. Britain is not just an island, but a crossroads of trade, culture, and history. My friend, now close your eyes and imagine. On a distant hill, shining in the first rays of the morning sun, is a huge building. Surrounded by strong walls, it is one of the defensive fortresses the Celts called hillforts. These fortresses were not only places of refuge in times of war, they were also symbols of pride for Celtic society, standing at the center of life. Celtic castles were often built in strategic locations, on high hills. This location provided a natural defense against enemy attacks. When an enemy army approached, it was possible to see them coming days in advance. Hillforts consisted of wooden and stone walls surrounding a settlement. The ramparts were sometimes built in several layers, which further strengthened the defenses. Ah, my friend, behind these walls were hidden not only stones, but the honor and faith of a people. Inside the castles, the daily life of Celtic society went on. Houses were usually arranged in round structures built on stone foundations. These round structures were very effective in terms of both durability and functionality. Imagine a stage around which animals roamed, children played, and women prepared food. This was the soul of Celtic society. Most of the inhabitants of the castles practiced farming. Cereals, dairy products, and meat were the main sources of food for these communities. Inside the castles, there were also workshops. Here, iron workers produced weapons and tools, while craftsmen made ornaments. The hill fort was not only a defensive structure, but also a center of production. Many things needed by society were produced here. Hill forts also served as ceremonial sites. In the squares at the center of the castles, druids would perform rituals and rites in the presence of the people. These events were the bonds that held the community together. Imagine, my friend, the sound of the drums overhead, the enthusiastic shouts of the people, and the words of wisdom from the druids. War. Ah, for the Celts, war was not only a struggle, but also a matter of honor. Celtic warriors were known for their bravery on the battlefield. Their struggle reflected not only physical strength, but also the strength of their spirit. The war strategies of the Celts show how skillfully they used the natural environment. Hill forts were one of the greatest advantages when enemies attacked. These fortresses were used not only for defense, but also to demoralize the enemy. When enemies approached the walls, Celtic warriors would attack with stones and arrows thrown from on high. Imagine the helplessness of an enemy attacking these fortifications. Celtic warriors were known for their individual bravery. Many of them painted their faces with woad, a blue dye, before battle. This had a frightening effect on the enemy and concealed the identity of the warriors. Celtic warriors also demoralized their enemies by shouting and singing loudly on the battlefield. Weapons were one of the cornerstones of the Celts' fighting skills. Celtic blacksmiths were masters of ironwork. Long swords, spears, and axes were the most common weapons used by warriors. Shields were usually made of wood and reinforced with iron. These shields were an effective tool not only for defense, but also for attack. Celtic warriors also used chariots. These chariots not only provided speed and agility, but were also used to break up enemy lines. Chariots demonstrated the strategic acumen of the Celts on the battlefield. Celtic society had great respect for its warriors. The death of a warrior was not only a loss, but also a matter of honor. Warriors were immortalized in legends and songs. People passed down their stories from generation to generation. As a result, the Celts' defensive structures, settlement patterns, and war strategies ensured that they not only survived, but also left a strong cultural legacy. Traces of these castles can still be found in every corner of Britain. Ah, my friend, when you climb to the top of a hill and touch the stones of a ruined hill fort, you will feel the breath of the past. Ah, my friend. We are now embarking on a journey into the ancient texts of ancient times. There was a time when the world saw the island of Britain as a myth behind the mists. To the Greeks and Romans, this distant land was on the edge of the unknown. For them, Britain was a foreign world beyond the rivers and forests. In the first written sources, we find information about Britain in the works of Greek writers. In the 4th century BC, the Greek philosopher Pythias ventured out to explore this mysterious island. Imagine, my friend. Despite the difficulties of the time, Pythias sailed against the north winds and reached Britain. In his works, Britain is referred to as Albion. This name was probably inspired by the white chalk cliffs of the island. Pythias describes Britain with its cold climate, fertile soil, and fisheries. He also mentions that the people living on the island lived in harmony with nature. Centuries later, Roman writers began to describe Britain in more detail. Julius Caesar brought the mystery of this island to Rome when he made 2 expeditions to Britain. In his writings, Caesar describes Britain as a dangerous place. Look through his eyes, my friend. At the end of a sea voyage, he sets foot on this island, covered with dense forests and ruled by warriors. Caesar describes the people of Britain as barbarians, but does not deny their courage and strength of resistance. Roman writers speak of Britain's fertile soil and rich natural resources. However, they add that access to these resources meant facing the harsh people of the island. Tacitus, a Roman historian, also devotes a special place to Britain. In Tacitus's writing, Britain is a symbol of resistance and freedom. Especially when he writes the story of Boudica, one of the local leaders of Britannia, he emphasizes that the people of the island would not submit to oppression. Can you hear the breath of those days through these accounts? The political structure of pre-Roman Britain reflects a complex and divided world. What we know today as an island was then home to many independent tribes. There was no unified state or central authority. Instead, each tribe defended its own territory and lived under the rule of its own leaders. Tribes were usually headed by a chief or king. However, these leaders were responsible for providing for the needs of the people, not only in times of war, but also in times of peace. Each tribe made its own laws, kept its own customs, and worshipped its own gods. Man, different stories echoed in every corner of Britain. The alliances were sometimes formed between these tribes. It was in their nature to unite, especially in the face of a common threat. But these alliances were often temporary because competition between the tribes was always strong. Even issues such as trade and resource sharing could lead to conflict. One of the most striking features of the political structure of pre-Roman Britain was the concept of leadership. Tribal leaders were usually chosen from among warriors. Strength, courage, and leadership skills earned a leader the respect of his people. But it was not only on the battlefield that these leaders worked to improve the lives of their people, but also in times of peace. The political fragmentation of pre-Roman Britain ensured that the land had a rich cultural diversity, but also left it vulnerable to external threats. This fragmentation facilitated the later conquest of the island by the Romans. My friend, to understand the complexity and richness of Britain at that time is to understand the soul of this island. My friend, the story of the seas surrounding Britain was written not only by the dance of the waves, but by the skill and courage of the peoples who inhabited this island. Now close your eyes and feel the wind of that time. Imagine wooden boats gliding on the waves and the silhouette of new lands on the horizon. The inhabitants of those lands made every effort to explore the opportunities offered by the seas. The seas around Britain were not just a barrier, but a bridge. The island's early peoples mastered these waters, forging links with neighboring islands and continental Europe. Who knows, maybe these early sailors sailed the high seas, using the stars as a guide. Boats were simple and small, but functional. They were often built to navigate rivers and coasts. But brave sailors were also able to reach further afield. Seafaring was not only a means of transportation, but also a way of survival. The peoples who inhabited these lands benefited from the bounty of the seas. Fishing was one of the main livelihoods of many communities. The seas provided not only food, but also valuable trade routes. Goods such as salt, amber, leather, and even exotic stones were transported across these waters. Britain's maritime activities also enabled cultural exchange between the islands. Trade not only transported goods, but also ideas, beliefs, and traditions. Britain's peoples enriched their cultures with influences from continental Europe and neighboring islands. Particularly during the Mesolithic and Neolithic periods, many innovations, from agricultural techniques to stonemasonry, reached Britain through these maritime connections. Another important result of maritime activity during this period was the deepening of relationships between communities. Trade routes were used not only to transport goods, but also to forge bonds between communities. Imagine a ship docking on the shore, and people speaking different languages trying to communicate with each other. At that moment, you are faced with another gift of the seas, friendship and cooperation. But the seas were not always friendly. Storms and waves were a constant danger for these sailors. Yet the British developed resilience in the face of these challenges. While the sea was a source of life, it was also a challenge that constantly tested their courage and skill. The islands surrounding Britain were not only neighbors but also allies and sometimes rivals. Places like Ireland, the Isle of Man, and the Hebrides were important targets for early British seafarers. Goods, ideas, and even people themselves moved between these islands. Peoples in the east of Britain forged strong links with other parts of the Celtic world, while communities in the west developed closer ties with Ireland. The effects of cultural exchange are most evident in art and ritual. Celtic art is famous for its intricate patterns and symbolic figures. This style spread from Britain to Ireland and from there to other parts of Europe. Religious rituals and belief systems were also carried on these sea routes. The early peoples of Britain saw the seas surrounding their islands not only as a source of livelihood, but also as part of their identity. Seafaring is one of the most important elements that has shaped Britain's history. Without the courage and skill of the people of that time, Britain would not have been able to connect with other lands and develop so rapidly in its own right. Ah, my friend, imagine you are sailing a boat through those choppy waters, sailing into the unknown. That's when you can understand the seafaring spirit of Britain. Ah, my friend, I will now take you through the dusty pages of history to a turning point in Britain's destiny. A story of the power and ambition not only of the British lands, but of Rome itself. Here begins the story of that magical time when a leader named Gaius Julius Caesar first set sail for the mist-shrouded shores of Britain. Caesar was not only a commander, but also an ambitious politician. Rome was busy conquering Gaul, and Caesar was using these victories to consolidate his personal power. But his eyes were always on the horizon, looking for new opportunities. Britain had remained an enigma for the Romans until then. In their eyes, this island was a distant land inhabited by barbarians, but it was also portrayed as a place full of riches. There were several reasons for this expedition. First, he had learned that some tribes in Gaul were receiving support from the Celtic peoples in Britain. Britain was like an ally, supplying arms and soldiers to Gaul. Caesar wanted to cut this link and consolidate his rule in Gaul. The second reason was his personal reputation. Conquering an unknown land like Britain would have made him a legend in Rome, in the eyes of both the people and the Senate. But the people of Britain did not simply accept the invasion. The Celtic tribes had historically been steeped in a warrior culture. They were brave and determined, but they were also independent communities, often at odds with each other. Before Caesar's arrival, the tribes in Britain tried to band together to form a united line of defense. However, this effort was not entirely successful because of disputes between the tribes. When Caesar reached the coast of Britain, Celtic warriors were ready to welcome him. On his first voyage in 55 BC, Caesar's fleet met unexpected resistance. The Celtic warriors on the coast, with their long spears and shields, made it difficult for the Roman soldiers to land. But Caesar was an experienced commander and led his troops skillfully. Still, this first campaign did not result in the great victory. He was forced to retreat without advancing into the interior of Britain. A year later, in 54 BC, Caesar returned with a larger force. This time he took thousands of soldiers and a larger fleet. When he landed on the coast of Britain, tribal strife made things easier for the Romans. Some tribes surrendered to Caesar and gave him hostages, but others, especially those led by a leader called Cassivellaunus, put up fierce resistance. These two campaigns did not result in the complete conquest of Britain. Caesar was unable to establish a permanent Roman presence in the interior of Britain and left the island shortly afterwards. But these campaigns initiated the first important contact between the two worlds. The Celts saw up close the disciplined armies and advanced fighting techniques of the Romans. At the same time, Rome witnessed Britain's rich resources and geographical advantages. For the peoples of Britain, these campaigns were a challenge that reinforced their cultural and military identity. Their resistance shaped the island's resilience in the face of future invasions. For Rome, the full conquest of Britain was postponed for another time. But these campaigns marked the beginning of Rome's ambitions for Britain. On his return to Rome, Caesar explained the potential riches and strategic importance of Britain to the Senate. This laid the foundation for future Roman invasions. Ah, my friend, I can almost hear the footsteps of those first Roman soldiers landing on the shores of Britain. Imagine the excitement of those moments when two different worlds met here. Britain, that foggy land, was now part of Rome's legend, but this land would continue to stand on the stage of history, retaining its independent spirit. Now stop and think. Imagine that you are one of those Roman soldiers following in Caesar's footsteps. You march bravely through the mists, not knowing what awaits you in this unknown land. It is in moments like these that history is written. Ah, my friend, isn't it fascinating to imagine what Britain was like before Roman rule? Back then, the island was home to independent tribes, each living their own way, yet bound together by a shared culture. It was a land of Celtic people, driven by a love of freedom and blessed with natural riches. Before the Roman invasion, Britain wasn't a unified state. Instead, it was a patchwork of tribes with their own leaders, rules, and ways of life. These leaders were chiefs, known for their bravery in battle. They made decisions for the prosperity of their clans and took up arms against enemies when needed. The economy relied heavily on agriculture. Thanks to Britain's fertile lands, they grew wheat, barley, and other grains. Sheep and cattle were vital for both food and trade. In fact, Britain was a significant trading hub with other parts of Europe. And it wasn't just food. Celtic craftsmen were famous for their beautifully worked metals and gemstones, which were in high demand abroad. Trade routes were like lifelines for Britain's economy. The island's natural harbors were perfect docking spots for trade ships. This seaborne commerce didn't just boost the economy, it enriched Britain's culture. But these connections also caught the attention of powerful civilizations, like Rome. In 43 AD, the Roman Empire set its sights on Britain, seeking to control its wealth and strategic importance. But this wasn't just an invasion. It was the meeting of two vastly different worlds. When the Romans, with their mighty armies, marched into Britain, they faced fierce resistance from the Celtic tribes. Yet, Rome's strength wasn't just in its military. It also brought advanced technology and culture. They built roads, founded cities, and introduced more efficient farming methods. On the flip side, Roman taxes and land policies were a heavy burden for the Celtic people. For the Celts, the invasion meant losing their freedom. But the people of this land didn't give in easily. Leaders like Cassivellaunus, Caractacus, and Boudica led unforgettable rebellions against Rome. Their resistance became moments of pride etched into Britain's history. The Celts' fight against Rome showed their warrior spirit. Using guerrilla tactics, they fought Roman legions in the swamps, forests, and mountains. Their deep knowledge of the land helped them slow down Roman advances. Still, the lack of unity among the Celts weakened their efforts. Some tribes chose to collaborate with Rome while others continued to fight for their freedom. This division made it easier for Rome to establish control over Britain. My friend, the story of Keltik Britain is one of resistance, freedom, and change. While the Roman invasion was a turning point in Britain's history, it couldn't completely crush the spirit of the people who lived there. Just imagine how incredible it would be to see those pivotal moments through the eyes of the people who lived them. Picture yourself as a Celtic warrior fighting for your freedom, or a Roman soldier stepping into unknown lands for conquest. That's the magic of history. So, dear listener, we've taken a journey through the pages of time, from Celtic Britain to Roman Britain. But this is only the beginning. Until our next story, take care of yourself and keep these tales close to your heart. After all, history isn't just a record of the past, it's a guide for the future. End.